Why did a massive forest fire sweep through a remote national park valley just weeks after a man vanished into it, permanently erasing the only clues he ever left behind? In June of 2003, investigators found Larry Kimble's truck parked neatly at the Rocky Point Trailhead. No footprints, no gear missing, and no signs of a struggle. It was as if he simply evaporated into the trees, right before the entire landscape turned to ash. To understand how a man completely vanishes without a trace, we have to look back to the spring of 2003, in the small town of Dorr, Michigan. This was the home of 39-year-old Larry Thomas Kimble. On April 1st, Larry made his final known contact with his family. He had an ordinary life, no known enemies, and no documented history of erratic behavior. Yet immediately after that final call, Larry climbed into his dark blue GMC pickup truck and began an unannounced 1,200-mile journey directly toward the deep wilderness of Glacier National Park. When Larry arrived in northwest Montana in early April, the park was transitioning out of a brutal winter. Many high-altitude roads were entirely blocked by snow, and the tourist season was still months away. For reasons investigators still cannot explain, Larry bypassed the major open areas and headed straight toward the deep woods near Fish Creek Campground. What drew an out-of-state visitor to this specific frozen lakeshore at a time when the trails were completely deserted? Weeks melted into months with absolutely no word from Larry. Then, in late June of 2003, a national park ranger patrolling the quiet loop of Fish Creek noticed the dark blue GMC pickup still sitting exactly where it had been left. A routine check of the license plate sent an immediate chill through park dispatch. The truck belonged to a man missing out of Michigan for over 60 days. Larry had walked into these woods in the freezing April thaw, and the isolated trailhead had been guarding his empty vehicle ever since. The official law enforcement timeline begins the moment the truck doors were open. Inside the cab, investigators found no signs of a struggle, no forced entry, and absolutely nothing out of place. Why would a man travel 1,700 miles, park perfectly at an isolated trailhead, and then step into the deep woods without his wallet or any known survival gear? The keys were missing, indicating he took them with him. He had walked directly onto the Rocky Point Trail, entirely unprotected from the biting April cold, leaving his identity behind in the console. National Park bloodhounds and search teams immediately flooded the area around Rocky Point. They combed the dense undergrowth and pushed through the thick shoreline brush, but the dogs couldn't catch a single viable scent. Because over 60 days had passed since Larry's last contact in April, any immediate physical evidence had been utterly erased by the elements. There were no clear footprints in the melting spring mud, no broken branches, and no dropped items along the shore. It was as if the forest had reset itself, leaving absolutely nothing to track. As July arrived, the physical ground search was drastically scaled back due to a complete lack of actionable leads, while the park began to experience an intense historic heat wave that dried the wilderness to absolute tinder. On July 23rd, the atmosphere above the valley fractured with dry lightning, sparking an ignition that would become known as the Robert Fire. Within days, this blaze mutated into a massive wall of flames, moving with exceptional speed directly toward the Fish Creek drainage, the very place Larry had vanished. The wildfire tore through the valley with immense speed, forcing the immediate evacuation of all park staff and bringing the passive search for Larry Kimble to a dead stop. For weeks, the ground burned, until over 57,000 acres were completely consumed. The historic blaze didn't just halt the investigation, it physically melted away any microscopic trace Larry might have left behind in that valley. When federal and local investigators finally compiled the forensic evidence after the fire was contained, they returned immediately to the primary anomaly, the dark blue GMC pickup itself.
If Larry had walked away from his vehicle in extreme distress, why did forensic teams find absolutely zero signs of panic inside or around the truck? The vehicle was parked entirely square within the lines. The windows were rolled up tightly, and the doors were locked securely from the outside. There were no foreign fingerprints, no trace of blood, and no indications that anyone else had ever been inside the cabin. This immaculate placement forced investigators to consider an unsettling alternative theory. Had Larry actually been the one to park the GMC truck at the Rocky Point Trailhead, or did someone else drive it there? The missing keys meant that whoever locked the vehicle had walked away with them in their possession. But if a third party was involved, they left absolutely no physical trace, no foreign clothing fibers, and no distinct footprints behind. The truck stood completely isolated, a mechanical marker guarding an impenetrable mystery. Forensic financial analysis and subpoenaed phone records yielded the exact same result: absolute silence. Following his last known call to family on April 1st, Larry's bank accounts and cellular phone activity ceased instantly. If he was planning to disappear deliberately and start a new life, why would he abandon his entire financial footprint without withdrawing a single dollar? He had not stocked up on cash, he had not accessed his accounts, and he left no electronic breadcrumbs anywhere in the country. He had simply walked away from the modern world and dropped completely offline. Searchers hypothesized that Larry might have wandered off-trail into the deep, unforgiving ravines surrounding Rocky Point, where a single misstep in the melting spring snow could easily lead to a fatal accident. But without a clear starting direction, searching for a single individual across thousands of acres of vertical wilderness was a near impossible task. Every passing day diminished the probability of a rescue, leaving investigators with nothing but theories, right until the skies ignited in late July.
More than 2 decades have passed since Larry Thomas Kimble turned his vehicle into the Fish Creek campground loop. To this day, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System tracks his file under the active status of missing. Case remains officially unsolved. Over the years, local sheriff's deputies and federal rangers have repeatedly analyzed the sparse documentation, but without a single fragment of clothing, bone, or personal gear, the file has gone completely cold. There are no active suspects, no indications of foul play, and no new tips. Larry is recorded simply as a man who walked into the wilderness and never returned. For his family back in Michigan, the decades since 2003 have been defined by an agonizing, unbroken silence. They are left only with old memories and the haunting knowledge that his final steps occurred thousands of miles away from home. Every investigative lead has terminated in a dead end. Because no physical trace was recovered before the environment changed, authorities can neither prove foul play, an intentional disappearance, or a tragic accident. The file sits permanently frozen in time, a puzzle missing its most critical pieces. The deep wilderness holds its secrets closely, and in the case of Larry Kimble, it has refused to yield a single clue for over 23 years. This case exposes the brutal, unrepeatable finality
of environmental erasure when the Robert Fire incinerated over 57,000 acres of Glacier National Park in late 2003. It didn't just alter the physical landscape, it systematically scorched away any microscopic trace of forensic evidence down to the bare mineral soil.
Today, decades later, a new generation of forest growth covers the valley where Larry's truck was left behind, masking the deep scars of the old blaze. But beneath the soil, the absolute truth of his disappearance remains tightly locked away in the deep wilderness. Some answers are not just lost, they are entirely consumed, leaving behind a permanent silence that no investigation can ever break.